All right. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to have you back again. My name is David Severance. For those of you who are new, I'm one of the coaches here at CSC. Delighted to be with you this morning. Glad you're with us. Today, I'm going to challenge you to think a little bit about why you sometimes fail to succeed in your efforts to get somebody else to do something you want to do. You want them to do. Think about how successful you are when you want to try to convince someone else to do something or not do something. Whether it's a client, you want to convince them that they need to change the price that they're asking for the house, or maybe they need to, redo the kitchen or do something to it in order to get the house to move, or maybe it's something in your personal life. Think about the times when you try to get somebody to do something that you would like them to do and you fail at it. We'd like to think a little bit this morning about why that may be happening. So I'd like to ask one or two folks to come off of mute, please. Bring to mind a recent instance where you asked somebody to do something that you wanted them to do, but it didn't work. They didn't do it. For some reason, whatever your message was, it didn't land with them with the kind of impact that you wanted it to have. Either they refused to do what you wanted to do, or they only did it halfway, or whatever. Can we have someone come off mute, please, and just tell us briefly what that was so we can have an example in mind?
I have, of course, I have an.
Marina, thank you.
Of course, I have something which is actually I've been reflecting on that for a little bit and see what I could have done better. So we were under contract, and then the seller requested like 2 days extension, and then the buyer, I was representing the seller, and the buyer is like, okay. And then the association didn't approve them by the time of closing. And then we're like, okay, let's extend. And then my sellers are like, no. And I'm like, why not? Whenever we were, request an extension, we did it. And then now, like it was gonna work out perfectly, because for 2 weeks they were gonna have to rent some a storage facility and etc. And I'm like, why? And then in their mind, I think that they could have get out of the contract and sold for a higher price, which I had told them at the beginning. But it was like pulling teeth. And the only reason why he accepted to sign it is because the buyer put his foot down and actually hired an attorney and said, if you don't sign it, we're going to be under litigation and you're not going to be able to do anything with this house for the next year.
Got it. Thank you for the example. Good example. So let me just ask you, Marina. Let me ask you, Marina, when you reflect on that now, think back to that communication that you did, where was it that you think this misfire happened? What was it that contributed to them not going along with what you thought they ought to do?
Okay, I really think that they thought they could get a better, a higher price for their property. That's why they didn't want to extend. And then throughout this whole thing, because I tried everything, including the fact that it was the moral thing to do, because it was what we had said, right? And then he's like, this is business, Marina. So I feel like at the end of the day, they thought that I wasn't on their side. But I am,
so
but
you were
at
coming
the same
from a
time,
morality
it was,
angle.
sorry. Yes.
So it sounds like you were coming from a morality angle and they were coming from it's just business angle.
Yes. At the same time, he kept saying that it was the buyer's
Maybe that was
fault
part
because
of
the
it.
buyers took a while to apply for the association, which they didn't. It's just that the association is awful. Anyhow.
Got it. Understood. So it's a good example. So thanks for sharing it. I appreciate the honesty there. What we want to think about today is not the specifics necessarily, but I'm going to ask each of you in a few minutes to think of your own example where you made a pitch to somebody or you made some kind of communication to somebody and it didn't work out, and to reflect on it now and think, what happened there? What was happening where I was delivering this particular message and the person heard it in a way that wasn't really the way that I intended, or their mind was somewhere else. They weren't with me there. The message didn't land with them. When we look at these kinds of things from a kind of a neurobiology kind of point of view or an interpersonal sociology point of view, we see three particular things that trip us up. That is, when we look back at a communication that we had where we failed, almost always we can assign part of the failure or all of the failure to one of three particular areas within the communication. So let me pull up a slide deck. We'll talk about each of those areas, and I'll ask you to think about a failure that you had and which of these three might have been a space where it was kind of a factor in your situation. Okay. Amp up your impact. We're using this model called AMP, which stands for three things. Each of these three items are integral and really important to you getting your message across to somebody in a way that it lands. When we say the word lands, what we mean is it comes to them in a way that matches where their brain is at that moment in time to create the intended impact that you have. So often we have a communication with somebody else and our mind is here and we're presenting the information from where our mind is coming from. But their mind is not where our mind is. Their mind could be on, the bills they have to pay or an accident that they had yesterday and their arm still hurts from it or whatever. Could be anything that separates them from where we are. And therefore the message that we intend to land in a certain way with them doesn't land. You can use the AMP model as a simple checklist for yourself next time you have a communication that you want to give to somebody. Let's talk about what AMP stands for. Three things: audience, message, presentation. I suggest that you write AMP, audience, message, presentation on a Post-it or something, put it on your computer, on your wall or something like that, so that next time you're thinking about or constructing a communication in your mind, you can make sure you check off all three of these items. Because almost always when we find that we failed in one of these three areas. Let's talk about each one for just a moment. Audience. When you have a particular communication, you always have a receiver. And we'll use that receiver in terms of this audience in this case. It could be an audience of one, could be an audience of several, could be your whole family, for example, or it could be a whole large audience in the traditional sense of audience. But typically in the business setting, you're talking with one other person. And as I said a moment ago, we make some kind of an assumption, an unconscious assumption that a person is able to receive the information that we're giving in the right frame of mind for it to have the impact that we expect it to have. And when we find out that it didn't have that impact later on, it's usually a surprise, or it could be a big problem or a mess that we need to clean up, causes extra work, extra time and effort for us. And so we have to think about why is it that that particular message didn't land. And so the most important part of this model is thinking carefully enough about the audience to know how to deliver the message so that it has the required impact. Because the gap here is between intention and impact. Sometimes our intention is this, but the impact is this. And so our work actually is, if our impact is this, we need to adjust our message so that the impact is that, even if it's not our original intention. So you need to ask yourself at least three questions. Do what we call an audience review or an audience analysis, even in a couple of minutes. It doesn't have to be long or involved, but sometimes the difference between thinking for 5 minutes about the person regarding some of these questions or not thinking about them is the difference between success and failure. First and most importantly, what's happening for them right now? When you deliver this message, what is on their mind? What are they bringing into that conversation, that particular moment in time? If you're only thinking about what's going on in your life and you're going to present from that particular point of view, it's hard for them to understand exactly where it is you may be coming from. Maybe they're coming into the conversation with, they just had a car accident 5 minutes ago and they made the appointment on time, but their car's banged up and so they're distracted. Or maybe they're coming into the conversation with, they just Googled something and they just checked Zillow and they found out that a house down the street, which is very similar to theirs, sold for 25% more than theirs is on for. And they're wondering why you didn't price the house higher. Maybe that's what they're bringing into the conversation. Or maybe they've had 3 deals fall through and they don't think they're ever going to be able to buy the place. And so that's what they're carrying in. It's crucial for you to, in thinking about constructing your message, to have a clear awareness of what's happening for them right now, what it is they're going to be bringing into that space when you deliver the message. What are their interests at that moment in time? What are their concerns? This is a great chance to think about Med-C. If you were to ask them, what are their motivations right now? What are their expectations right now? What are their disappointments or concerns right now? Those kinds of questions help you hopefully understand where they are at a given moment in time, especially that moment where you're going to deliver this message. because that message is going to be heard by them within the context of whatever's happening for them in their life. I'm sure you've had examples where you said something to your significant other or somebody else in your family or a client, and they just weren't ready to hear it at that time. They just weren't there. They weren't able to hear it. It doesn't matter how you say it. Maybe the timing wasn't right. We'll talk about that in just a minute. What do they need? Very often, someone comes into the conversation with a particular need that's prominent in their mind. It may be directly related to your message. It may be directly related to something else, but nonetheless, it's real for them. And so if what's on their mind is related directly to what you're talking about and you're going to offer a solution or an option, that's great. If what's on their mind is something else, you may need to think about whether this is the right time to deliver the message or not. So the most important part of this process is to take a little bit of time to do an audience analysis and say, when I deliver this message, what's going on in this person's life? How are they likely to present themselves with this information that I'm going to give them? That's audience. I can almost be certain that Marina's case or other cases, if you're thinking about a particular instance for yourself, that when you delivered a particular message, the person simply wasn't in the place that you thought they were in. And therefore they heard the message differently from the way you thought they might hear it. Message. When you construct the message, this has to flow after the audience analysis. You have to think about where they are because you can't construct your message until you think about how it is they're likely to receive the message in that form. And so after you do an audience analysis, you think about where they are at this particular moment. Maybe they're freaked out because they've lost 3 bids, and each time they bid on 3 different houses, they've gotten outbid from somebody else, and they know that in today's market, they're never ever going to find a house. If they're really freaked out about that, you may need to talk them down a little bit before delivering your message, for example. So when constructing your message, you need to be really clear about how do I match or how do I meet whatever's on their mind? And most importantly, what do I want them to walk away from our interaction with? What do I want them to walk away knowing? Are you giving them more information? Maybe you're going to tell them that a house down the block that's very similar to theirs just sold for 25% more and it's time to raise the price, for example. Or what do you want them to think, or what do you want them to think about? We've talked about these things before in some other sessions. Or how do you want them to feel? Maybe you know that your client is really dejected because they've lost three potential deals and they just can't seem to get it done. Maybe they're sad. Maybe they're worried that it's never going to get done. Maybe they're worried that their dreams for retiring or whatever it is aren't going to happen. Maybe you need to talk them down in that particular case. So you need to think clearly in your own mind, at the end of this conversation, what do I want them to be experiencing? Knowing, thinking, feeling, or doing? What action do I want them to take? And you can write this down on a piece of paper and you can say, at the end of this conversation, I want George to. And you can just fill in the blank after the know line or the think line or the feel line or the do line. Be really clear in your own mind what it is you want them to take away from the experience and what you want to happen next. Very often, we're not so clear about what that is. We think we're clear, but we're not. We might blend together what we want them to think and to feel, when really what matters is, let's say, the feeling part or the thinking part or the doing part. That's message. Third, presentation. This flows from an audience analysis and the message. It's not just a matter of being clear about what the information is that you're transmitting or what you want to happen. It's how you present it. And very often we have a good message and we understand the person that we're talking with in that given moment, but we don't present it in the right way. There's a couple of things that you need to think about as a simple checklist when you decide how you want to present the information. Crucial piece of that is when. When is the right time for me to deliver this? Very often we deliver it when it's convenient for us. I've got time between this appointment and that appointment, so I'm going to call up my client now and say this. But it may not be the right time for your client to hear this because your client is right on the way to pick up the kids, or the client has 3 kids in the back seat and they're all screaming and throwing the toys around and the Cheerios are spilling on the floor, right? And so when has a huge influence on how effectively your message lands. Another piece to think about here is your message fundamentally about informing the person? Or is this going to be a discussion, or is it a decision point? How you present it makes a big difference. If it's just an informing, then perhaps how you do it might be text or email, and that's perfectly appropriate. But if it's a discussion, then you start asking yourself, should I do it via Zoom? Should I do it via FaceTime? Should we do it in person, right? It makes a huge difference whether you're informing them or you're going to start a discussion or you're going to make a decision with them. And they may not think it makes a big difference. They may not even think about how you're presenting it. They probably won't. But if you're presenting it with the wrong mode, in a sense, they'll absolutely feel it. If you want to have a deep discussion about whether they should change the price on the house and you're simply going to do it by text, for some people that may work very well, for others it won't work well at all. The presentation mode itself may be no good, even though the message is a good one. So that's it. It's very simple. Audience, message, presentation. Do the audience analysis first. Ask yourself those previous questions. Move to the message piece next. And when you think about what the message is, then move to presentation. So let me pull this down. And let's talk a little bit about those examples that I asked you to bring to mind before. Now, come back to that example that you were thinking of before, or think of a new one where a message that you delivered to a client did not land. When you think about it now, do you think it's because it's an audience issue, a message issue, or a presentation issue? If it's an audience issue, maybe there was something you didn't realize about the client. He or she valued something higher than you expected or lower than you expected. You thought this was the important issue, but you found out later that this was the important issue. Or was it about the message? Maybe you weren't clear about what you were asking the person to do, so they didn't know what to do. Or maybe it was about the presentation. Maybe if the timing was wrong, or the mode you used was wrong, or you were trying to expect them to do a particular decision when they weren't ready to do the decision, they needed more discussion. Let's have a couple of folks come off of mute, please, and tell us which one of these three areas, or more than one, do you think contributed to something that didn't quite work?
David, can you hear me okay?
I hear you.
Hi, David. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Will.
And everyone else here, nice to meet everyone. So, I often find that I'm a very even-keeled person, right? I used to work at 911 and people would call with these incredible issues. And I was great at the job because no matter what people had, I respond in a very calm and collected manner. That's how I am. And I often find that when I share things, they don't land the way I intend. And if I had to match what you're suggesting, perhaps it's because I'm not matching with their empathy. They might be very excited or angry or frustrated or a lot of animation on the other side. Not with our client, yes, but with an opposing realtor trying to get their client under contract, right? And when I respond, without matching their level of excitement, it can come across as condescending or arrogant, right? So perhaps that would fall under presentation. I'm not sure.
Absolutely, Will. Great example. And I didn't mention that, but this is another piece of this. It's absolutely under presentation. If someone comes to you with a certain energy, you have to think about what's the energy that you are giving into the relationship at that moment with the message. If it's a great message, it might be natural that you're very excited. Hey, you sold the house and I got 50,000 more than we expected out of blah blah blah, right? That could be exciting. But when they come to you with a certain amount of emotion, they can easily misinterpret what it is you're giving back if your emotion level or energy doesn't match them. Someone who's really upset who comes to you and says, I can't believe what so-and-so did, and I am so angry and I'm so disappointed, blah, blah, blah. If you have a very quiet demeanor, which may be natural for you, and that's actually my style too, you can be accused of being arrogant perhaps, or uncaring. Maybe you're not feeling what it is I'm bringing to you here. And so if you're trying if what you would like to bring to that person at that moment is an experience of calming down, then perhaps if the gap between your energy level and their energy level is so big, they're going to experience that as a mismatch. So one of the things that we try to do is, we tell people is, think about how you can make your energy level a little bit closer to theirs. You certainly don't want to get someone who's upset about something more upset. Perhaps one way to contribute to them at that moment is to help them bring that emotion level down a little bit. So someone who's a little bit steady when the person is freaked out a little bit absolutely can help that person kind of calm down a little bit and get talked off the ledge. On the other hand, our presentation can easily create an impact that we never intended at all. Thanks for sharing that one, Will. Let's hear another one.
I just want to say something really, really quick since Will mentioned that. I think that I'm on the other side. Like I get way too emotionally attached to everything. And I'm like, I feel like I panic when my renters can't find soon enough. I'm like, oh my God, you're going to be homeless and you're not worried about it. And I am. One, two. And then I think like after reflecting, you know, what you're saying in my situation, I think I got defensive, you know, on the situation. So just wanted to
Yes.
go on the other end.
It's another good point. You know, when we start to feel that perhaps we might be getting judged by somebody, or maybe we feel like we're not getting the result that we intend to get for them, or we start to wonder whether they're really going to like us as an agent or whether they're going to continue to trust us as an agent, it's very easy for us to add an element of energy that may not work for them. And so we may be delivering perfectly good messages about what needs to happen now to get this place to sell or whatever it is, but our emotional energy is coming out in body language or something like that, and it may not be a fit for them. You know, it's interesting that Marina said, the person said, it's just business. Well, for that person, that could be a clue to us that for them, it's about even keel. It's about, let's not get too high or too low about things. It's just business. It's just X's and O's. It's just, you know, dollars and cents. And so for all of us, you know, part of this presentation part is this energy that we're bringing with us when we deliver a message. And sometimes, you know, we may not know how to deliver a message. We haven't kind of clarified in our mind yet how we want to present something to somebody, but then they bring it up and suddenly we have to do it, right? We're like on the spot and we have to respond to something, and we're not ready to do that yet. Sometimes that can be a struggle. Absolutely. Let's hear another one.
David.
I'd like to hear from somebody else. Yes.
David?
Colleen?
It's Colleen.
Oh.
Yep.
Can I go next?
Hi.
Yes.
Thank
Sure.
you.
Let's hear from Renee. Sorry, Colleen. Let's hear from Colleen and then we'll hear from Renee. Sorry.
Hi. So anyway, just on that, you know, what Marina said about, you know, being defensive and whatever. And I found myself last week when, or the week before, I have a client who's very difficult. And actually she called while I was, while this is on. But anyway, I found out that she's suffering from some onset dementia, right?
Mhm.
And I didn't find this out until a couple of days ago because she was referred by somebody else. Because I would say to her, "Oh, Jean, yeah, you know, remember the blah blah blah. We were talking about that." She goes, "You never told me that." And I heard this a lot. I've heard this a lot. And then she would say, I said, "Oh, there's an email from so and so, you know, my transaction coordinator. Did you get a chance to read it?" She goes, "You didn't send it to me." And I'm like, well, I really thought I did. Let me check, blah, blah, blah. And of course I sent it to her. And, you know, she kept saying, "No, you didn't do it. No, you didn't." I mean, and it's constant, David. And it's frustrating. And then when I was talking to her friend who referred me, and I just said, who bought from me as well. And I just said, you know, you know, I have to say, I'm really glad we got an offer. And she goes, "Yeah, it sounds like you got a really great offer." And I said, "But you know, I just was concerned because I would tell her things and she said I didn't. And then I would get defensive and I'm like, oh yeah, you know, blah, blah, blah." And she kept saying this to me. She goes, "Well, you know, I think she has some onset dementia, you know, and she's 60." And I was like, oh my God, you know, what do you do, David? You know, when you said it, you wrote it and she's not reading it, or she's only hearing what she wants to hear. And there's a lot of anxiety with this woman. And when there's a lot of anxiety, the person doesn't hear. You know, they don't hear because they're in their own
Yes.
voices in their head. Make sense?
Correct. Thank you for that, Colleen. What a great example. Imagine how differently you can think about your relationship with an individual if you go from not knowing they have dementia or early onset dementia, whatever it is, to having it, right? Suddenly it becomes a whole new awareness of how you might need to interact with a person. It might require a different level of patience, a different level of persistence. It might take some extra time, but suddenly it makes sense to you. Understanding what they're bringing into the situation. This is what the audience piece is about. Now, I'm not expecting everyone to go around asking, "Do you have dementia or not?" Right? But the point is to understand your audience. What she's bringing into every interaction with Colleen, unfortunately, are some memory challenges. That's what
And
she's bringing
anxiety.
consciously or unconsciously.
Yeah, and heavy anxiety, David, because she's so
Yes.
afraid of losing money. And I got her over asking after we lowered the price. Yeah.
Got it. Yep. So this is such a big one. You know, anxiety is an emotion, right? It's a word for fear, right? Anxiety, nervousness. These are just different versions of fear. And so emotion is something that your clients will bring to you on a frequent basis. But do you ever think about that when you talk with them? Like, you could just look at them, you could think before every communication and say, on a scale of 1 to 10, where do I think their emotion level is today? And if this is a person who's prone to that, that's a big factor in how they're going to hear what you have to say. Thank you, Colleen. Let's hear from Renee and then Mercy. Renee?
Hi, David. Thank you. So I have a situation where right now I am not landing my impact on my message to the seller's agent. Right now it's been going on for a week now. So basically her point was that the personal reference letters are not in proper English, that they don't reflect the caliber, of the buyers. But really, I think her underlying message or behind the iceberg, the water,
Yep.
to me, I think now that I'm learning this today, is perhaps her, her wanting to be acknowledged. And that I was, initially, as soon as I heard her comment on the personal letters, which I've never heard anyone ever made comments on anybody's personal reference letters in my experience. And mind you, this is a condominium, not a co-op either, in New York City. So I immediately just, basically, dismissed her because I just didn't think that, her reason was reasonable. So now it's been going on, and I don't know what to do. I'm trying to lend my message, and as I was writing and rewriting this email, I'm trying to, back to her. I'm trying to apply, I guess, what I'm learning today. What do I want to get across? What I want her to know. I don't know. It's just been quite frustrating because we're ready to submit, and yet she's holding, these seller's checks and these originals hostage because in her opinion that these letters are, they can be swapped out for anybody's names, as in like a pretend marriages. Those are her exact words. So I just don't know how I can get my message across to her that let's focus on what the board truly needs, which is unique letters and science letters, not the contents nor the grammar or the stylistic writing of these letters. So
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. So it sounds like the message you want her to hear is what's most important is not the grammar, it's this other stuff. That's what you want her to know, right? Underneath the M part of that, which is message, right? It's what do you want them to think, know, feel, or do? It sounds like what you want her to know is that grammar is not the most important thing here for success. However, you bring up the topic of icebergs. And we talked about this earlier in the week. We talked about it from time to time. It's really important to keep this idea of this concept of icebergs in your mind, because underneath her iceberg is an idea that grammar matters. Underneath your iceberg is something else matters more than grammar, right? And so there's a fundamental disconnect here. And so as we think about this audience piece of it, what are they bringing into the conversation with you? What she's bringing into is a belief in her head that grammar matters more than something else, right? And so for you to help her see that grammar isn't as important as something else, she needs to be able to put down that belief and pick up the belief that you're offering her. And that may not be easy for her. So there are some things you could do. You could, instead of sending a message to her, you could talk to her on the phone. You could have a Zoom call. You could meet her in person. A fundamental rule that I have for all of you is when you find yourself in some kind of conflict with your client, raise the communication mode. Go from text to phone, or go from phone to conference call, or go from conference call to in-person. The higher you can go on the scale, the easier it is to talk through a difference of opinion. Very often we make a mistake in trying to solve conflict via text or email. It's too hard to suss out the nuance that's in there. It's very easy to misunderstand that stuff. That's why one of the things we always say is move up that scale. I can tell you a little bit more, perhaps, Renee, for your particular situation later. I'm afraid we're out of time, and I promised that we would hear from Mercy. So send me an email if you like. We could talk a little bit further, but that's something for everybody to keep in mind. Mercy, is there something you'd like to add? Are you there, Mercy? Going once, going twice. Okay, Mercy, we'll catch you on another call. So we'll see if we can make these slides available to everybody. Here's a comment from Luciana. I think Renee should meet her in person. It makes a whole lot of difference. That's just what I'm talking about. Move up the scale whenever you find yourself in conflict. It's too easy for human beings to misinterpret our intentions or our intended outcomes or how we feel about that individual. And if you're already in some kind of a conflict where they might be questioning how you feel about them, or they're questioning your competence or something like that, or you think they might be, move up that scale towards in-person conversation. It's a very effective technique to help you get the relationship back on track. So take the AMP model, audience, message, presentation, put it on a Post-it somewhere, put it on a wall next to your computer, and next time you're constructing something, use it as a simple checklist. Ask yourself those questions under the AMP slide, or ask yourself the questions under the message slide. Or am I asking, am I expecting the person to think, feel, do, wait a minute, think, no, feel, do, right. Think, no, feel, do. And then think about presentation. Remember, audience comes first, then message, then presentation, in that order. If you do it the other way around, you're not accounting for the unique nature of circumstances that that individual is bringing into that communication. And therefore your message or your presentation will always be wrong. And keep in mind the concept of the iceberg. We think everybody's in the same place we are. Guess what? Nobody on the whole planet is in exactly the same place as you are. And so you simply can't present your message from your own framework, because that's who you are, it's not where they are. Okay, folks, we're a couple minutes late. I hope this gives you something to think about, and I hope that you can apply one of these three or some question or something that's in here next time you do this. Let us know how it helps you. This is lifelong work to develop your skill to do this consistently over and over and over again. But if you can just raise your batting average by 1 or 2 points this week or this month, and then raise it again next month, over time you become more and more effective. And as you become more effective, your business becomes more successful. So good luck today, everybody. Have a good day out there. We'll see you again next week.